And I think to get out of this and to get a really healthy used EV market, all of these elements have got to work together to protect the consumer. Otherwise, the consumer is not going to buy a used EV.
The dealers have to understand where consumer demand is and where market supply is. Welcome to the AutoTalk podcast, Craig.
Thank you, Glenn. How are things?
It's been busy, but not as busy as you are here. You had a pretty big week last week.
Well, we did invite you, but unfortunately you couldn't attend. But thank you for your team for attending. Yeah, we had our dealer event last week celebrating 10 years of Dubicar's success.
Nice one.
And yeah, we had over 200 attendees to the Park Hyatt Hotel. We had a big awards night. And I'll speak to camera. For those customers that did join, thank you very much for taking time to come out and join us this evening. We had a fantastic time. It was very warm. There's a bit of humidity going on, so it was a warm evening. But it was great fun. And we partied through the night, and then we let our customers go at about 11 o'clock, so it was all good.
Nice. I've heard fantastic feedback from a lot of the dealers around town and from our team who were at the event. So really great to put on such an event, and congratulations on the 10-year achievement.
Thank you very much. Yeah, another 10 years to come, at least.
At least. So, today, electric vehicles.
Yes. Do you like electric vehicles?
Look, I love all cars equally, Craig. Whether it's electric...
Politicians answer that. Do you like electric vehicles, Glenn?
I think there's some really cool electric vehicles, and I think there's some ones that don't excite me as much. How about you, Craig?
I don't like them.
Okay.
I don't like them.
At least you're honest.
Yeah. I get them. I just don't. For me personally, I just don't like them. I just think that I like a bit of drama with cars. I like the sound. I actually like the smell.
I think they're doing that. They got the audio system wired in now.
It's just not the same. It's just not the same. It's like driving a washing machine. It's just a white good as far as I'm concerned.
An iPhone on wheels.
An iPhone on wheels. But I do understand them. And I think that's the beauty about the automotive marketplace is that there's a car for everybody.
Exactly.
There's a car for everybody. So what's going on? I believe you've done some extensive global research on used EVs.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work over the last year or so with a lot of the manufacturers and regional offices here about used electric vehicle residual values. And are they performing better or worse than petrol combustion cars, and the reasons why, and what's driving the market for used EVs, both locally and globally, because we haven't had them on the road here for so long. But internationally, there's some real trends emerging.
Who's interested in this data? Who's asking for it? Is it manufacturers or...?
Yeah, we've mainly been working with the manufacturers. I think as they're bringing more and more electric vehicles to market, they want to understand the total cost of ownership, the life cycle, what from a marketing perspective, what are the consumer pain points or hesitations, and just understanding, what does 2, 3, 4, 5 years out look like for an electric vehicle in the UAE.
Oh, right. Okay. So what have you told them?
Look, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but overall, I think the EVs internationally over the last 6 to 12 months, they haven't held their residual value. They've really come crashing back to earth. I think for the first few years, there was a lot of excitement, but in the last 12 months, they've really come crashing down in markets like Europe, UK, and the United States.
And why is that?
So we found 3 key reasons for it. The first of those is slower customer adoption. I think we're getting to a new stage of that adoption curve. All the early adopters have won. We're now at that mass market stage of the curve, and there's just hesitation. The mass market, exactly what you said. You're not dying to drive an EV, and I think the average consumer isn't necessarily dying to buy an EV. So adoption's really dropped off right at the moment that supply's picked up as more and more manufacturers are bringing them to market. So I think that was the first reason. The second reason was when you're looking at a like-for-like new car that comes in a petrol engine and an electric vehicle engine, normally the electric version of that same car costs more money. Yet on the second-hand market, they don't sell for any more. And in some cases, they're selling for less. So as a percentage value loss, that's one of the reasons they're losing more value. They're more expensive to start with, and there's not that premium in the second-hand market.
Yep.
And the third and final reason is there's been a lot of volatility around new car pricing of EVs. which really comes back to Tesla. They've been making so many changes over the last year or two to their pricing structure, especially for the Model 3 and the Model Y. It's really created a lot of hesitation, especially around dealers. They don't want to get stuck holding used EV stock if the new car price is going to change by $5,000 overnight with no warning. So because they're more conservative, they're also pushing the prices down.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, do you think that consumers are getting sort of savvy to depreciation costs on technology, right? So, if you buy a phone, you're going to lose money on it.
Yeah.
If you buy a TV, you're going to lose money on it.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're just thinking the same thing about an EV, but it's obviously a lot of money to lose? And how many people are there who can afford to lose that kind of money on it? I mean, have they kind of reached saturation of that level?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that people necessarily think about it like that, although I'm sure there's a percentage of consumers that when they're looking at some of the low-cost EVs, maybe they are just depreciating it to zero over 5 years, but I don't think the average consumer thinks like that. I think for the average consumer, 50, 100, 150,000 dirhams is still a lot of money, and part of their purchasing decision is knowing what its intrinsic value is going to be in 5 years' time.
So you've got some data points.
Yep.
What sort of are you seeing in the data point? What sort of residual values are you seeing, and what kind of horror stories are you seeing out there?
Well, I think if we start at a global level and then we'll narrow down to the UAE, I think, as I said, globally, we've seen them drop. And there was a really interesting study in the UK from 2022 to 2023, where they looked at residual values of different cars by fuel type. So based on the fuel, what the residual value was doing. Bearing in mind, that was 2022 to 23. So the used car market was actually booming over this time. And you want to know what they found? It's over that 12 to 18 months, pure EVs lost 20% of their value, while every other used car increased in value over the same period of time. And the car that increased the most was a hybrid car, which I think is so interesting because I think that shows consumers want the best of both.
Yeah.
They want the best of the ICE vehicle. They've still got range anxiety, but they also want, when they're driving around town, to be able to drive on an electric engine. So I just found that was such an interesting takeaway, that a hybrid vehicle had the biggest increase in residual value and an electric vehicle had the biggest decrease in residual value.
You've got to say hats off to Toyota. I mean, they read the market, right? Where every other manufacturer went all in EVs, they didn't. And they were criticized for it. Chief exec was under a lot of pressure. He held back, and it seems to have paid off.
Yeah, well, I think it's paid off for Toyota and everyone who's got more of a portfolio strategy. And I think that's, if I was running an automaker, I'd have a portfolio. I'd have a battery electric vehicle, a BEV for the customers who wanted that. I'd have a hybrid vehicle, which is probably where the mass market is probably moving to at the moment. And then I'd have some internal combustion options as well.
You mentioned before the podcast a horror story about Hertz.
Yeah, Hertz US. I don't know if you're familiar with it. When they bought all their electric vehicles, I think 200,000 Polestars and Teslas, and that was their resurrection plan to come out of bankruptcy, was to convert their fleet to EVs, appeal to a younger audience, an audience that wants to drive an EV rather than just any old rental car. And that was their strategy when they came out of bankruptcy. Fast forward a few years, the strategy went horribly wrong and they fire sailed all the cars at the start of this year. And you could pick up a second-hand Model 3 from only $18,000.
No way.
They auctioned them all off almost overnight, flooded the market with used EVs, and they've gone back to more of a petrol strategy. And I think they said there was a few reasons why it didn't work. People didn't want to pay a premium to drive an EV as a rental car. They had huge range anxiety, because if you're traveling somewhere and you're renting a car, that's the last thing you want, to run out of charge. And the third and most interesting thing, they found that they were having more accidents and they were costing more to fix. People weren't familiar with the cars, they had more power, the controls were different, they were getting involved in more and more accidents, and they cost more to fix. So they were less popular, more expensive to run, they depreciated faster, and they took I think it was over a $200 million loss on that fleet getting rid of them.
Yeah. I mean, in some respects, it's good that the rental companies haven't gone all in on EVs, because then the market would be completely swamped with used EVs at ridiculous prices. So in some respects...
Contrast that to here. When was the last time you caught an Uber I'd say over 50% of the time I get an Uber now, I get an EV. So I think that might be coming in this market. You see a huge number of Tesla Model 3s on the road and Model Ys as EVs. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the next 1, 2, 3 years as they come off fleet.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, there's definitely going to be volume coming in. So I mean, kind of that, I suppose, leads us nicely onto the local market and what does this mean for the local market and what can car dealers do to protect themselves against these things.
Yeah, well, when we look at some of the data in the local market, we're seeing that if we look at the Tesla Model 3, for example, because it's been around for 3 or 4 years in the market now, and it's the highest volume car that we're seeing in the used EV market, we're seeing them sitting a 3-year-old car at about a 67% residual value. If you compare that to a competitive car in an ICE variant like a C200 Mercedes, which is probably the category leader for that sort of premium small sedan, and they've got about a 73% residual value, so almost 10% better. But our forecasts show that gap's really going to start to open up in the next few years. The Tesla's probably going to lose a little bit more of that residual value as more and more cars hit the secondhand market. And the traditional ICE cars are probably going to keep holding their residual value. And I was talking to a dealer last week who was actually saying they traded in a very young EV recently here in the UAE. And they couldn't find a single dealer to buy it off them secondhand, the trade-in car. Not the official dealer and not any of the unofficial dealers. So I think used car dealers are really hesitant around EVs at the moment.
Yeah. In fact, we did some research at the start of this year, and we did it on consumers and the reasons why they wouldn't consider a used EV. And you've got all the usual, you've got, the consumer knows they're going to lose money. That was interesting, as that was one of the top 3 things. They knew they were going to lose more money if they bought an EV, even on a used EV.
Wow.
Range anxiety, standard.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
But battery life and battery health was the number one thing. And there's a massive concern that, yes, there are warranties, right? But how good are those warranties? And do they protect you against the battery? The battery on some of these Teslas is very expensive. And if it goes, you've got no choice. You have to replace it. So I think from an industry point of view, it's going to be a real challenge, right? Because if consumers aren't rushing towards them, there's obviously going to be more coming back into the market. There's going to be more new cars coming in at lower price points.
Yeah.
I don't think, personally, this is a challenge just for used car dealers, right? It's a challenge for a much wider issue than that. I think it's a government issue.
Yeah.
I think it's an industry issue with the manufacturer. I think it's an issue with the battery manufacturer. I think it's an issue with the consumer. And I think to get out of this and to get a really healthy used EV market, all of these elements have got to work together to protect the consumer. Otherwise, the consumer is not going to buy a used EV, or certainly they'll be reluctant to buy a used EV.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's a too difficult problem for us to solve here on this podcast. But I think the manufacturers are aware of it and they're thinking about it. And I think as more and more cheaper new EVs hit the market, used EV residuals keep dropping, the manufacturers are probably going to have to support them. Or maybe consumer behaviours changes, Craig, to what you said. Maybe they just become cheap enough that people say, I'm going to pay 30,000, 40,000 dirhams for this car. I'm going to keep it over 7 years. In the same way I replace my iPhone every 2 to 3 years, I'm going to replace this car every 7 years. And if it's got any residual value, then that's a bonus.
Yeah. I did hear a conference I went to not long ago that was some very innovative Chinese battery manufacturers who were actually doing health checks of the battery.
Oh, yeah.
So they would base, which you could do with your iPhone, right? Someone can come out and tell you the health of the iPhone. So they come out and actually check the battery life and give you a certificate.
Yeah.
So I just think they're the things that car dealers have got to think about. If they are taking an EV, can they get the battery check? Can they give some sort of health check? Can they tell the customer that the warranty will protect them for 8 years on the battery?
Yeah.
Regardless, they're completely protected. Can they get really good finance deals and lock the customer in for 3, 4, 5 years on that where customers aren't thinking upfront cost, they're then thinking monthly. So I think they're the kind of strategies that dealers are going to have to think about if they are going to stock used EVs. And it sounds like some of them don't.
Yeah, we certainly hope that changes. And I know we've had some requests from the dealers we work with around this, and we've got a few things in our product roadmap actually around some of the things you mentioned around doing electronic checks of the health, But even, just based on the driving conditions, the weather conditions, you can tell so much about how that battery ages in this part of the world versus the UK or the US.
Yeah.
So we've currently got some things we're working on around our used car valuation tools, taking into account the battery. And something I learned in this journey in the last year is the metals that make up the battery in an EV actually have an intrinsic value. So the car probably won't trend to zero. There's actually a worth there from a recycling and scrap value that's probably greater than an ICE car.
Yeah.
So
I can just see the advert now on Doobie cars, saying, "Don't worry, this car will be worth something in scrap." So therefore, it's not all bad. But that sort of leads us back to the previous podcast. It's telling a story, I suppose. So, yeah. So what's the to wrap this one up? What would you say are we're obviously talking to the car dealers of the UAE.
Yeah.
What are the three things that car dealers in the UAE should think about when it comes to stocking a used EV?
Well, I think this is a bit of a preview of one of our upcoming episodes on stocking strategies. But the three things I would say to the dealer is, there's an opportunity in stocking used EVs. So I wouldn't necessarily shy away from them. The dealers have to understand where consumer demand is and where market supply is. And they also need to have a solid way of valuing them, understanding the mechanical and the battery side of the vehicle. And I think if they can master those three things, there's certainly an opportunity and money to be made in used EVs.
Yep. Okay, very good. Then, thanks for that.
Thanks, Craig. Speak to you next time.